Hey there, Housers. Welcome to another episode of On the Way Home. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite, and I work with the good folks at Balludor. Over 120 of us working hard to support our most vulnerable across York, Peel, and Durham with our housing programs, our health supports, and our construction social enterprise. Do great work there. Check out all the work we're doing at balludor.ca. So proud to be a part of that team and proud of the work that they do. We have a great guest today. Listen, no news to anyone listening to this podcast. Most likely, we are in a housing crisis, and we need leaders, and we need organizations to show leadership and innovation and creativity to push through. And today, we're talking with Jeff Neven from Indwell. Indwell's been around for 50 years, leading the way, and they've constructed thousands of units and all sorts of different units and thoughtful units. And Jeff and I talk about that. We talk about his journey into the sector, of course. His family, a background in construction, was the family business. Jeff went more social worker and theology route, but then construction ended up coming back into his life with Indwell. And he started there as a volunteer and pushed forward. And now they're working in 7 different municipalities, building housing, and so thoughtful to around the housing they build. They're not just putting up any old build. They look at creating spaces that encourage people to be social, to be healthy, stairwells with lights in them, windows in them for lighting, so people take the stairs, laundry rooms that encourage social interaction, that really thought out. They use passive house specs on their buildings, so they're truly affordable and they're good for the environment. They've converted an old church that they bought recently, and they continue to do national leading work in creating deeply affordable housing. And Jeff makes sure we understand that they are helping people move from encampments into affordable, beautiful, dignified housing that fits with Indwell's values. Very, very cool stuff. We talk about some of the frustrations that Indwell has 14 projects ready to go, and saying right now only one has the green light. And it just really comes down to dollars to make it happen. To do deeply affordable housing, you need that financial support to make the numbers work. So something's got to give, but he's an optimist. He's saying, look, it's not like we don't have the answers to these challenges that are before us in ending homelessness. We know what the answers are, and we're ready to work through them. We just need people to get on board. And by people, he's meaning all levels of government. And of course, you, the listener, and the general public who can support Indwell. We talk about their community bonds program as another way of raising dollars. And we've had Tapestry on our program here, on our podcast, talking about how that works to raise dollars. And you will not find a more innovative builder, I think, in the sector. Jeff and his team of 300 are doing incredible work and continue to do so. It's a great conversation from a great leader in our sector. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I did. Let's go to that conversation now. Jeff, so excited to have you on the podcast today. Throughout the past few years, every time I talk to people about who should I talk to who's doing incredible and innovative and impactful work in the sector, and they always say you. And they say, Indwell's doing this, Indwell's doing that. So I'm pumped to have you on today to talk about that. Before we get to that work, I have to ask you the question I ask everyone who comes on the show, and that is, what does home mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question, and thanks for having me. I think home for me has been impacted. Probably one of the people who's impacted me the most is a civil rights leader from the U.S., actually, a contemporary Martin Luther King Jr. His name is Dr. John Perkins. And he would bring a communal aspect to home, that home is much more than just shelter, although it is that. But it's in community, and it's in proximity to others who have similar goals for their neighbors and for their community. And so when I think about home, it's really a place where people belong, a place where people are validated, a place where people have deep relationships and friendships, a place where we all have the opportunity to use our skills and our assets to the benefit of our neighbor. So that's when I think of home. I think of those kind of things.
Amazing. And the theme that you often hear throughout the answers on this podcast is just like you're talking about. People aren't talking about the physical structure. They do talk about that sense of belonging, safety, community, all those different pieces. I always think back to that Adam Vaughn quote a few years ago when he said, people experiencing homelessness are just neighbors without a home. And I think it's that simple. Let's talk about yourself and your journey into this work. We often say that, when you're in it's kind of grade 3, 4, and people are talking about what I'm going to be when I grow up. This is not usually where they thought. But let's talk about your journey. Walk us along.
Sure. I'm the youngest of 4 kids and a family that is now 4th generation construction family. And I, as the youngest, felt early on that I did not want to go into construction and into the family business. And so I'm the black sheep, and I went and studied social work and actually theology, and it's interesting how these pieces have come back together, and now I'm in bringing the social work lens into construction and running a business and being immersed in construction field. It happened from the time I was an infant. So it was kind of in our blood. It was around the dinner table. My folks were, they ran the business together. And because of that, there was lots of dialogue at the dinner table. We openly discussed which projects we wanted to do, which ones you might make money, but you wouldn't have any fun and you wouldn't like the people you're working with. So, how to avoid those ones and to find the ones that were good and that you could responsibly run a company as well.
That's so interesting. And kind of all your worlds coming together, right? Of your education, your family's history in construction, etc. And you can't talk housing or homelessness without thinking about new construction. Definitely something you're doing now with Indwell. Talk to me a little bit about Indwell. How long has it been around? How did it get started? Where does it operate? And what does it do?
Yeah, so Indwell is a charity. We were started actually in Hamilton. This is our 50th year anniversary. And it was started by folks who saw a need due to deinstitutionalization. People were coming out of psychiatric hospital and they didn't have the skills to live independently. And I would argue they didn't have the networks and relationships to support them to live outside of the institution. And there's probably a lens there as well that sometimes people were exiting institutions with trauma and harm from those places. They've been cut off from their family, friends, and so folks already in the early 70s were coming out of institutions and they were ending up homeless. So this a family started taking people into their home, and their faith community said, "Hey, let's help you with that." And they helped to first rent and then buy a home and to go a little bit bigger in that regard. For the first 25 years or so of Indwell, we were just one congregate living home that helped people to transition from psychiatric hospital into community. Back in 1999, the economic model of that wasn't working anymore. Also, there was more need than they were able to service with the, I think they had 4 bedrooms in the house, and most of those had 2 people in a room, and more people needed help, and more people needed help with affordable housing on exiting that program. And so our board looked at how do we do things differently, and with the help of a donor, we were able to buy an apartment building, and that began in about the year 2000. I started at that same time as a volunteer, working on the committee of the board, promoting this. A year later, I came on as staff, but back then, 2001, we had 3 full-time staff. We had about 5 supported tenants living with us at the time. And we've now grown that we have over 1,200 units in 7 municipalities across southern and southwestern Ontario, from Mississauga westward, and we have almost 300 staff currently. Most of those are supporting tenants to remain housed in. And that looks a bit different. Each program has a different level of support, and each program is targeting kind of a different level of acuity. And so we have programs that are taking folks straight out of encampments and still psychiatric hospitals, and helping people to transition towards further independence. And those folks would have quite a high level of acuity. We have on-site multidisciplinary teams that help keep people housed and supported. On that would be food support, there'd be nurses, there would be addictions workers, there's social workers, housing support workers, and really a team that is able to wrap those supports around someone who's living independently in their own apartment and taking steps in the direction of setting and meeting their goals.
Wow, congratulations on 50 years of changing and I'll say saving lives, because you do. You and your team of 300 miracle workers. Now, in a time of, this is a housing crisis. I mean, this upcoming budget we're hearing about is all housing, which is wonderful. It's top of mind for many Canadians, hasn't always been. But regardless of who's been in government, federally, provincially, locally, you have pushed through, you've made things happen. What is about like your model? How are you getting all this work done when these challenging financial times? We talked offline just a little bit about zoning and the different challenges around that. How are you making it all work? And you know, you're growing rapidly. How's that happening? What's the secret?
So, Michael, it's really hard. There is no magic here. You know, I tell our staff that success is not the absence of challenges, but it's the fortitude and grit in which we overcome those. And every day there's new challenges, which requires us to come up with new ideas and new ways to make things happen. We were able to utilize essentially our model really emphasized bringing three distinct pieces together that were a bit unique in our sector. And so one is that we did our own property development and project management. We hired contractors, but we did our own project management. So we could design buildings that were very tailored and specific to our clientele. And again, it comes out of our values. Our values are dignity, love, hope. And it's connected to what we were just talking about around our definition of home. So in most private sector spaces, people just want to get to their apartment and they want to have as many interactions with their neighbors as possible. We actually build buildings so there's more interactions. We put laundry rooms in prominent, beautiful, well-lit spaces with community rooms adjacent to them so that people can do laundry and meet their neighbors. And we have spaces for people to gather in each one of our buildings. So we're actually intentional about how we design buildings. We do things like put windows and stairwells to encourage people to take the stairs for health reasons. And a lot of these things that so in the development of buildings, that's one piece. We own and manage our properties, which is also a unique piece. Our facilities team members are part of our support team, and they interact as such. And I can circle back to that, why that's important. And then the third piece is the healthcare supports. And bringing all three of these pieces together mean that we can bring the type of unit onto the market where it's needed, and we keep learning. What does an accessible unit look like? We're a leader in energy efficient buildings. Everything that we're building is up to passive house standards. Most of our new buildings don't even have gas lines hooked up to the property. And so we're leading the way from an environmental kind of way, because we're going to own these buildings for 50, 100 years. And so we really care. And whether the tenant pays the utilities or us, that doesn't really matter, because we have to find a way to make it affordable. So it's a concern for us whether we're paying it or whether the tenant is paying utilities. We want to keep those down. So that's the unique piece that we kind of bring to the table. is those different aspects. And I'll just give you an example of we've done something, some new things where we've been asked to provide support in some regional municipalities in their existing buildings. And one particular building that we're providing support in was built in the 70s. It was built with the only operating window is a patio door, the sense that you would have access to the outside and it would be lovely. The challenge is there's also cut through the wall where you could put an air conditioner. But what tenants were experiencing in the community is that people would push out the air conditioner and climb into their unit. So that wasn't safe. So most of the air conditioning holes have been boarded over, meaning the only ventilation you have in your unit is a patio door, which I don't know about you, but having no security isn't valuable to most people. That's I should say it's a problem. And so people can't open their patio door, otherwise someone will walk through it. And so they have no ventilation and no opening windows and no air conditioning. And neighbors were complaining that people were naked and they didn't want to see people through their windows naked. And we actually found out this is an environmental problem. And the environment is the landlord didn't provide window coverings and didn't provide any ventilation. So we were able to solve that, not through the municipality, because they said we don't have a budget for, we don't do window coverings and we don't have a budget for new, a capital budget for new airflow and such. But we can solve that actually by having a different type of air conditioner that just puts a hose through that opening. And we can actually do things differently. Maybe we can buy it and provide that to a tenant or rent it to a tenant at a low fee, and we can figure out window coverings. And that's just kind of an example of how sometimes and what had been happening previous to that is people would call the police. So these are like the day-to-day kind of stuff where being aware and concerned of the environment in which folks are living. Sometimes it's actually the environment that needs to change so that somebody isn't overheating, and then we can solve some of those other issues as well.
I love all the thought that goes into everything, whether it's your own builds or retrofitting a build that's already there, or the thought around how do we fix these problems. And it doesn't always have to be super costly, and that's, I mean, one of the things we run up against in these new builds is, if we're going to make it deeply affordable, how do we do that and still have the dollars to pay for the expenses needed to cover? And I love what you're saying. I mean, often with buildings, going passive house route can be quite expensive, right? And there's added costs up front, but you're talking about making something truly affordable. If we have a unit, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, but the utilities are really, really high. It's no longer affordable. So you're thinking about everything. You're thinking about the social pieces, the connection pieces, the environmental and cost pieces. So well thought out. Do you have a building that you've done recently that you're extremely proud of or that you could talk about?
Yeah, last year we opened a site in downtown Hamilton, kind of kitty corner, if you're familiar with Hamilton, to the General Hospital. The first phase had 3 buildings, and we have another one that's ready to go. I can talk more about that, what's keeping us from green lighting new projects. But on this particular one, it's 3 buildings, 108 units in total. And one of those buildings is really unique. It's the old stable and carriage house of the dairy that was on site. So it's a historical adaptive reuse. And it's a partnership with Sacagawea Housing, which is an Indigenous organization. And that building has 13 units, and all are for Indigenous folks. And the main floor actually has Sacagawea's office. And so this is our 3rd building that we're partnering with Sacagawea, trying to rectify the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the homeless sector. Two of the areas that we're in, Hamilton and London, have very similar kind of stats on that, depending who's asking and when. Between 25 and 30% of the homeless population identifies as Indigenous, while in the total population of those cities, again, depending who's asking and when, it's about 3 to 4% of the total population is identifies as Indigenous. And so the overrepresentation there is substantial. And it's in these partnerships that are really exciting. And the next one is I'm even more proud of is we had a property that we've got it zoned, we've got the land cleaned, we had the designs, and we were able to transfer that at just the cost of what we had into it over to Sacagawea. So this is kind of a land back opportunity where this is their project. Our development team, actually, we've spun that into a separate nonprofit now called Flourish, that they will support Sacagawea through getting that building built. And so that's an exciting one. One other one I'm quite excited about is in Kitchener. It's called St. Mark's Place, and it's a former church. It was St. Mark's Lutheran Church, and they sold us their building at about half the appraised value. And we were able to work together to create housing there. The building has a long history in the neighborhood. So from the exterior, the building looks almost identical to what it did, but today it's filled with units. And the sanctuary, we've trimmed it down a little bit, but it brought some of the front wood backwards. So it has still the stained glass windows, but we've shrunk it a little bit so that it's a size that we can use for our tenants as a community space and continue to be a community space for the neighborhood, with the community kitchen off part of that. And that program's taken folks directly out of encampments, and so I'm particularly proud of that. And that just opened in December. And those are the stories when you talk to folks and say, where'd you live before this? And they tell you about a tent alongside the river, and you hear the stories of moving in with just one grocery bag worth of belongings, moving into a new apartment, and you see this opportunity for transformation. And that stability changes, the stability of housing changes everything.
Absolutely. It absolutely does. And I've seen some of the buildings that you've done. They're absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, all different types, so innovative. You talked just a minute ago, you talked about some of the things that are stopping you from greenlighting projects and the challenges. What are some of those biggest challenges? And what do you think has to change for us to really make some big, impactful steps forward?
Sure. So just to be clear about Indwell's mandate, our mandate is for households really at the lowest level of household income. Most of our tenants are on living with disabilities. Often that's mental health and addictions. And so the primary source of income that folks are living with in our housing is ODSP. So they have about $550 worth of for their housing allowance, which the expectation is they use that, right, for that they use that for their rent and for their utilities. And it's laughable actually at how far the difference is between what those actually cost. And so to try to get those rents down that low requires that we really can't carry much financing, if at all. And so that means we really have to go after a capital stack. And that was possible a couple of years ago. We were getting up to 40% grants from the co-investment program. That was trimmed down to 20. Now that's been trimmed to 25,000 plus 2 additional 25,000 if you meet certain thresholds, which we do. So there's a cap now of about 75,000 in grant from the federal government The provincial government, there are some programs that roll through municipalities, but overall there is no supportive housing or affordable housing program of the province that we can apply to for the capital side. And so what we do typically is we start with our supporting community. The supporting community, often we fundraise, often 10-15% of a project. And municipalities is our next stop. And that can come in all different forms. Sometimes that's free land. Sometimes previously that was waiving of development charges, finding ways to have the province in. And then the provincial and federal government seem to be in a race to be last to the table, which is quite a challenge. So we're currently, to be quite frank, we're kind of stuck. We only have one project right now opening in 2024, one in 2025, and one in 2026. We have 14 sites that are construction ready that we are looking for funding to greenlight in virtually every major community across southern and southwestern Ontario. And we're not alone in this. In Hamilton here, we're part of a coalition called Hamilton is Home of supportive housing providers. And we could start on 450 units tomorrow of supportive housing just in Hamilton alone as providers that are, the sites have been purchased, they've been zoned, the environmental contamination has been taken care of, the designs have been done, and we're ready to go. And so, quite frankly, Michael, we're in a frustrating period. We're in a period where we can't make these projects go because on the capital stack, we have to. Right now, it's about $100,000 to $150,000 gap per unit in order to hit those deeply affordable rents that are required because people's incomes are so small. So something's got to give. We either need to have a capital fix, or we need to find some way to get folks more income to solve that. We have a number of different ideas. Our supporting communities coming together and rallying around. Last week, we just issued a social impact bond, which helps us to get projects up to that through the pre-development and through the construction stages. We're working with each level of government, trying to say, okay, if this doesn't work, the way that we did it 3 years ago doesn't work, what's the way that we're going to work together to make it work for this year and next year? Because we are determined. It's not acceptable for me to open one new project in around 40 to 60 units. That's kind of our sweet spot. One of those every year. We need to be opening one in each of the 7 or 8 municipalities and growing into more municipalities. We should be opening 12 a year projects with 12 under construction and 12 under pre-development right behind them. And we have the capacity to, and quite frankly, it's frustrating to have this capacity and have the solutions right there. Homelessness is a finite challenge. It's not like climate change where we're like, if we make this intervention, what will happen? Can we prove it? Is it going to make a change? Homelessness is a finite problem. We actually know how many people are homeless in each community, and unfortunately it's growing. And we as a sector know their names. We've done needs assessment as a sector in the homelessness sector, and most municipalities have. We know what solves homelessness, and it's starting with housing and wrapping supports around people, and it works. Just to give you an example, last year, in the first 6 months of last calendar year, we took 161 people out of homelessness, directly out of homelessness. And we house those folks. And we're almost a year later now for some of those who moved in a little later in the first 6 months. And 94% of those are housed with us. 1% have moved on to further independent housing. 1% have moved on to long-term care, which was more appropriate for them. So I would call that a 96% success rate a year afterwards of taking folks out of homelessness, moving into their own apartment with supports. So it works. And I think that's the frustrating part is we have the solution, we have the opportunity, but for some reason we don't seem to have the political willpower and and quite frankly, the communal response and demand that this is a priority for us.
You're absolutely right. I mean, quite often we hear about we need housing supply. What's missing from that conversation is what you were saying there, deeply affordable. And folks, when we talk about affordable housing, CMHC would define that as 80% of mid-market rent, which is not affordable to most. That's not what Jeff is talking about. You correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about deeply affordable, where people are paying roughly about 30% of whatever their household income is, or deeply, deeply. And to make those numbers work, as Jeff is saying, to raise the money to build it, and with the rents coming in deeply affordable, you need a lot of money. It's very difficult to do. But to hear you have 14 sites ready to go, you have the knowledge, the will, you know how to do this, you have the success rate. We're in a housing crisis, and those numbers are growing. It's tragic to hear. What are your hopes moving forward? I'm pretty sure you're a hopeful guy. It's frustrating. We've got a budget coming up that will probably come out before this is heard. But what are your hopes for the next couple of years for Indwell and your hopes for the future of housing?
So Michael, I'm optimistic because we as a society know that there's a need. We know that the current solution of tents and parks is not a good solution, and it's not sustainable. I'm in my home right now in downtown Hamilton. There's 150 people sleeping outside in my neighborhood. On my block alone, there's 3 people sleeping in cars, and one guy has been sleeping in his car for over 2 years. So we have a problem. The good news that makes me optimistic is we actually have a solution. It's doable. It's and it's realistic. I was talking to somebody recently from the private sector, and they said, CMHC is talking about 5 million homes needed across Canada, and that seems daunting. And they're like, but the number you're talking about doesn't seem so daunting. What you're talking about is a couple of thousand units in a mid-sized city like Hamilton will end homelessness now and in the coming years. Yeah, yep, that's what we're talking about. That seems doable. It is doable, and so that's what makes me optimistic. I think we have some other opportunities right now. The housing industry has put the brakes on. I'm hopeful that in the next 6 months that cost of construction will actually come down slightly, and we're already seeing in some places it is coming down. We were seeing labor shortages, we were seeing supply shortages. Those are easing, and so that makes me optimistic. I think we have a window right now, Michael, where actually the nonprofit sector can step forward. We can actually fill that gap, and we can fill it with buildings that are environmentally sustainable, that meet people's needs, and do some really amazing things like create community and help neighbors to be neighbors along the way, which will actually add to economic vitality of our neighborhoods. And those are the spaces that we've seen that lead to transformation in lives. And so that leaves me optimistic. The challenges are real. The challenges are significant, but that just pushes us. It pushes me. It pushes you. It pushes our sector to be more creative in coming up with new ways of, all right, we're going to face these challenges. We're going to come up with solutions because we are.
Absolutely. I have no doubt. I mean, you've risen the challenge so many times before. That's not going to change. And love the innovative approach you're taking. It's funny you mentioned the community bonds piece. We've had Tapestry on. I believe you've worked with them.
We are working with them.
We were understanding that as another way of financing and doing that. And I see there's Kensington Land Trust is working with them as well. So, Jeff, thank you so much for all that you and your team do. if people want to support, if they want to try and support financially, or they want to support politically, or they want to help, where can they go? How can they get on board?
Yeah, sure. Go check out our website, indwell.ca. You'll also see all the projects that we have open and all the projects that we're opening, and you can see those that are underway. The website's quite robust. And you can also see spots there if you want to donate, if you want to be a part of the social impact bond and you want to invest in affordable housing with supports in your community, you can do that through the website. So indwell.ca, INDWELL.ca.
Think of it, everyone in this sector, think about that. I mean, if you simply by investing, you can make some money and make a difference. So check that out, or you can just simply donate too. That's altruistic, right? Just do that. Go check out Indwell. They're doing incredible stuff. They're a national leader in this work. Jeff, thank you for your passion and all that you do. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
Thanks so much.